You've seen the glossy brochures and the perfectly curated social media feeds. Silver-haired couples steering a pristine $500,000 motorhome into a painted desert sunset, trading the suburban grind for the ultimate open road. It is marketed as the pinnacle of American freedom, the grand reward for 4 decades of punching the clock. But peel back the glossy veneer, run the actual numbers, and you will discover that for a massive segment of retirees, this exact dream is a mathematical nightmare waiting to happen. Welcome to the era of systemic erosion. We are operating in a financial landscape right now where the fundamental rules of wealth preservation have been entirely rewritten. Yet millions of Americans are still playing by a playbook drafted in 1998. Back then, $1 million portfolio and a fixed income strategy meant you were virtually bulletproof. Today, it barely keeps the lights on if you miscalculate your lifestyle overhead. Let's ground this in reality. Meet Richard and Helen, a 62-year-old couple living just outside of Columbus, Ohio. Richard spent 35 years in logistics. Helen was a regional healthcare administrator. They did exactly what the traditional financial talking heads told them to do. They maxed out their 401ks, consistently funded their Roth IRAs, and successfully accumulated a seemingly robust nest egg of $1.4 million. They are exhausted. They want out. And their ultimate exit strategy involves liquidating a chunk of their portfolio to purchase a beautiful, brand new $300,000 Class A luxury RV to tour the national parks. Their conventional financial advisor, who quietly extracts a comfortable 1% fee every single year, regardless of market performance, patted them on the back, ran a rudimentary simulation, and told them they were good to go. But that advisor is ignoring the brutal arithmetic of the current decade. Richard and Helen are about to collide head-on with a toxic combination of rapid asset depreciation, escalating diesel and maintenance overhead, and a structurally higher inflation floor that is quietly devouring the purchasing power of their remaining $1.1 million. They believe they are buying an appreciating lifestyle. In reality, they are taking a massive, illiquid position in an asset that loses 20% of its value the second the tires hit the public highway. The retirement industry sells you the illusion of safety through consumption. They want you to believe that checking off a bucket list is the same thing as achieving financial independence. It is not. True autonomy requires a ruthless evaluation of cash flow, a deep understanding of hidden tax liabilities, and an absolute refusal to be swayed by emotional marketing. If you are sitting there right now, holding a hard-earned nest egg and contemplating a massive lifestyle purchase like an RV, a boat, or a secondary vacation property, you need to freeze. Before you sign a single piece of dealership paperwork, we have to tear down the math. We need to look exactly at how the hidden carrying costs of this specific dream will drain a portfolio faster than any standard market correction. Let us run the actual numbers on Richard and Helen's decision, because mathematics is completely devoid of emotion. It does not care about your bucket list. Assume they decide to purchase that $300,000 Class A motorhome in cash to avoid the current elevated auto loan interest rates. To execute this transaction, they liquidate funds directly from their traditional tax-deferred 401k. This is where the first massive wealth leak occurs. Because those funds have never been taxed, a $300,000 withdrawal instantly catapults them into the highest marginal federal tax brackets, not to mention state income taxes. To clear $300,000 net to hand over to the dealership, they actually have to withdraw closer to $420,000 from their accounts. Instantly, their hard-earned $1.4 million nest egg is slashed to less than $1 million. They are starting their ultimate freedom journey with a newly reduced portfolio of roughly $980,000. Now we have to look at the carrying costs. The recreational vehicle industry rarely advertises the brutal reality of operational overhead. For a large luxury rig, you are looking at roughly $3,000 annually for specialized insurance. Fuel is a massive variable. A motorhome of that size achieves maybe 6 to 8 miles per gallon on a good day. If they travel even moderately, that is easily another $10,000 a year out the window. Then you have campground and RV park fees, which have skyrocketed alongside residential real estate. Booking prime spots across the country will effortlessly drain $15,000 annually. Add in a conservative $5,000 for routine maintenance, tires, and inevitable mechanical repairs, because a house rattling down the interstate at 70 miles an hour breaks constantly. That is $33,000 in fixed, post-tax annual cash flow required just to keep the vehicle legally on the road and parked. But the drain does not stop there. Remember their traditional financial advisor? He is still quietly extracting his 1% fee on the remaining $980,000. That strips away another $9,800 every single year, regardless of whether the market goes up, goes sideways, or enters a prolonged market correction. Combine the vehicle operating costs with the Wall Street asset management fees, and Richard and Helen are bleeding almost $43,000 every single year. Here's the terrifying part of this equation. The widely accepted 4% safe withdrawal rule dictates that a portfolio of $980,000 can safely generate about $39,200 a year without touching the principal. Do you see the problem? Their basic recreational overhead plus their advisor fee strictly exceeds their portfolio's entire sustainable yield. They haven't even bought groceries yet. They haven't paid their Medicare premiums, funded their HSA out-of-pocket expenses, or covered clothing and basic life necessities. To survive, they are forced to withdraw 6, 7, or even 8% of their remaining principal every single year. This is not wealth preservation. This is a mathematical guarantee of running completely out of capital in your late 70s. They traded appreciating, compounding assets for a rapidly depreciating fiberglass box that bleeds cash daily, triggering a systemic erosion of their entire financial foundation. So the obvious question becomes, why highly intelligent, capable Americans willingly walk into this financial wood chipper? Why does a retired structural engineer who spent 40 years calculating load-bearing tolerances suddenly abandon all mathematical logic the moment he walks onto a dealership lot? The answer is deeply psychological. We are fighting a relentless multi-billion-dollar marketing apparatus designed to weaponize your retirement anxiety. For the last 20 years, the lifestyle industry has carefully constructed a narrative dictating that true freedom is only achieved through constant motion and hyper-consumption. Look at the stark contrast between today and the late 1990s. Back then, a successful retirement meant paying off the primary mortgage, spending uninterrupted time with the grandchildren, and perhaps taking a modest, predictable trip south every winter. It was quiet. It was localized. Today, we are operating in the era of digital FOMO, the fear of missing out. You log on to social media and you are immediately bombarded by algorithms feeding you perfectly edited videos of your peers parked next to the Grand Canyon. You see the Joneses living their supposed best life, but you do not see the Joneses' decimated cash flow or hear their panicked calls to their wealth manager. The RV industry understands exactly how to trigger your hard-earned sense of entitlement. They look you right in the eye and say, "You worked hard for 40 decades. You sacrificed. You deserve this." That is arguably the most dangerous phrase in modern personal finance. When you hear that, your analytical brain shuts down. You stop looking at the systemic erosion of your portfolio and start emotionally justifying the purchase. Take David, a former software developer in Dallas. Brilliant guy, deeply understands complex systems. He bought a luxury fifth-wheel trailer because he convinced himself it was an investment in family memories. When his adult children were too busy navigating their own demanding careers to join him on the road, he was left pulling a massive depreciating liability across the country entirely alone, slowly draining his Roth IRA just to cover the premium diesel costs. I hear the objections constantly. You might be sitting there thinking, but my advisor ran a sophisticated Monte Carlo simulation and it showed a 90% probability of success. Those simulations are structurally flawed for the reality we face today. They rely on historical baseline inflation averages and generalized, smoothed-out market returns. They utterly fail to accurately model the hyperinflation of specialized vehicle parts, the explosive cost of transient out-of-network healthcare, and the brutal reality of sequence of returns risk. If we hit a severe, prolonged market correction in the early years of your retirement, and you combine that with a massive initial capital withdrawal to buy an RV, you create a mathematical deficit that you cannot practically recover from. You are substituting true financial autonomy for a temporary dopamine hit. True freedom is not steering a 40-foot fiberglass liability down the highway while stressing about your dwindling nest egg. True freedom is waking up on a Tuesday morning knowing your cash flow is completely insulated from external economic shocks, your principal is compounding undisturbed, and no dealership, bank, or Wall Street firm has a claim on your wealth. We need to break this psychological trap right now. Once you strip away the emotional marketing, you can start building a radically different, highly defensive strategy. If you have recognized that you are standing on the edge of this specific financial sinkhole, we need to pivot immediately to defense and restructuring. This is your Monday morning blueprint. We are going to permanently strip away the emotional lifestyle marketing and replace it with clinical mathematical strategy. First, you implement a mandatory 12-month capital freeze on any massive depreciating lifestyle purchases. No motorhomes, no boats, no impulsive secondary vacation properties. If your desire to travel the country is truly burning, you rent. Look at Sarah, a 58-year-old early retiree in Arizona. She was 3 days away from liquidating a massive chunk of her tax-advantaged accounts for a Class C rig. I told her to pause and rent one for a single month instead. She meticulously tracked every outbound dollar. She documented the exorbitant nightly campground fees, the shocking fuel burn, and the severe physical exhaustion of navigating a commercial-sized vehicle through high winds. She returned the rental completely cured of the illusion, kept her principal fully intact, and now uses the predictable yield from her investments to fund 3 luxury, hassle-free vacations every year. She achieved the exact same travel objective without absorbing a single ounce of depreciation. Second, you must ruthlessly audit your current cash flow model, and you absolutely cannot rely on a traditional wealth manager to do it for you. You need to stress test your nest egg against a prolonged period of elevated inflation and severe market volatility. If you need a completely unbiased clinical tool to run these exact variables yourself, check the link in my description for the retirement cash flow modeling software I personally use. It entirely bypasses the Wall Street fluff, giving you the raw, unmanipulated math to build a highly defensive strategy. Third, you have to stop the internal bleeding caused by assets under management fees. If you are paying 1% annually to a legacy firm just to watch them hold your money in standard mutual funds, you are voluntarily surrendering massive amounts of compound growth. You must transition to a flat-fee, advice-only fiduciary or migrate your capital into self-directed, low-cost index funds where the expense ratio is a fraction of a percent. This single defensive maneuver instantly injects thousands of dollars back into your baseline annual cash flow. Finally, we have to neutralize the IRS. You need a highly proactive tax bracket management strategy. Instead of pulling massive, panicked lump sums from your tax-deferred 401k to buy a depreciating asset, triggering the highest marginal tax rates, you execute strategic, measured Roth conversions during years when your taxable income is artificially low. You pay the taxes methodically at your consciously chosen bracket, permanently shielding that capital from future systemic erosion. You take back total control of your capital by treating your retirement not as an endless consumption-driven vacation, but as an active, highly protective wealth management enterprise. Let us project forward. Fast forward the timeline to year 10 or year 15 of this supposed dream. The shiny, massive Class A motorhome that Richard and Helen bought in 2026 is now well over a decade old. It has 50,000 hard miles on the odometer. The mechanical slide-outs are constantly sticking, the roof seals are degrading under the sun, and the secondary market is absolutely flooded with identical rigs from other retirees trying to bail out of the exact same mistake. That $300,000 asset? They will be incredibly lucky to offload it for $80,000. But the depreciation of the fiberglass box is entirely secondary to the massive depreciation of their physical capital. By their late 70s, the biological reality of aging sets in. Driving a commercial-grade vehicle across the Rockies is no longer an exhilarating adventure, it becomes a profound physical liability. They are inevitably going to want to stop. They will need to transition into a fixed, highly accessible living situation, potentially requiring specialized in-home care or assisted living facilities. This is the ultimate brutal reality check. Because they liquidated massive portions of their tax-deferred accounts early, paid exorbitant top-tier taxes to the IRS, and drained their compounding principal to cover hyperinflated campground fees, their remaining portfolio is critically hollowed out. They traded the crucial dollars needed for late-stage healthcare and true end-of-life dignity for a decade of expensive highway miles. They are now facing a severe liquidity crisis at the exact moment in their lives when they have absolutely zero physical ability to return to the workforce to generate active income. Now, I want to be entirely clear right here. I am laying out the unvarnished mathematics of wealth preservation as an educational strategist. I am not your personal fiduciary, and this is not individualized advisory logic. You have your own unique baseline, your own tax liabilities, and your own specific legacy goals. You must run your own numbers or hire a flat-fee professional to stress test your exact situation against these variables. But the core principle remains mathematically undefeated. The legacy retirement industry wants you weak, distracted, and constantly consuming. They want you terrified of leaving money on the table, so they convince you to put it on their table instead. You have to reject that narrative entirely. Retirement is not a permanent vacation funded by the systemic erosion of your net worth. It is the ultimate phase of strategic capital deployment. True wealth is completely silent. True wealth is a fortress of predictable, insulated cash flow that ensures whether you live to be 85 or 105, you will never be a financial burden to your children, and you will never be at the mercy of a broken government safety net. Keep your principal intact. Protect your cash flow ruthlessly. Rent the depreciating liabilities if you absolutely must experience them, but refuse to own them. Stop buying the glossy brochures and start building your financial fortress.